This video is for business and learning leaders who want to maximize the effectiveness of their training. So training your muscles and training your brain are similar or have analogous or comparable properties. And mainly what it is when you're training your muscles or you're training your brain in general, the more challenging it is, but you can still do it, the better, more effective, and more long-lasting that training will be. So this is actually sort of the second component of training. This is after the initial training has taken place. This is about recall, reproduction, recall, production, ideally, and reproduction if necessary, depending on the level of proficiency. So let's start with a famous saying that's attributed to Confucius, and that is, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Of this statement, the first two parts are actually less true than most teachers and trainers at any level think they are, because learning styles actually don't exist. You may not believe that. I didn't either, but the information is out there and I won't cover it in this video. I might put a link. Not sure. If I do, I'll put a link there. But my focus today is not on that, but on the last part, which is I do and I understand, which is 100% true. So essentially what it is I'll go through a list of ways to reproduce, to entrench, to reinforce learning from the most effective to the least effective. So the first one is to do, to apply, or to use. That is, take whatever you've learned and then apply it. So I'm going to give an example using some Japanese here. And the ideal situation would be for me to be in a social situation or a formal situation where I'm being introduced to new people. That is where this is meant to be applied or used. And then say, okay, go ahead, Tim. How would you introduce yourself? And my Japanese is terrible, so any of you Japanese speakers out there, I know I'm doing this wrong. I don't have a good enough level of Japanese to do it right. But it would be something like, Tim desu, dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. I don't know the very first part, the Tim desu, which just means I'm Tim, but the rest of it is correct. So that would be the highest level where I'm actually producing the knowledge in the context in which it needs to be applied. Another strong example would be how you learned math. Yes, most people hated math. This is one of the reasons, is because math problems are highly disfluent. You actually have to know and understand what you're doing to be able to produce the result from applying the sequence of steps for that math problem. So that's why they're challenging, but that's also why your learning that way is quite deep, is because you're not just repeating the exact same question over and over, which is superficial learning, but you have to now apply what you've learned to a different situation. So that's it. So apply, use, or do is the highest level. The second highest level, and some people would argue is the highest level, I'm not going to debate that, but I'm going to call it number 2, is to teach what you've learned or teach what you've just learned to somebody else who doesn't know it. That is a fantastic way to reinforce your own learning. And there's an expression in Japanese, a proverb, which is to teach is to learn, or the translation is roughly that. And it's very, very true. Okay, so now what I'm going to talk about is different levels of disfluency. And disfluency is just a fancy way of saying make more difficult, or less fluent, or less easy. So this is adding or introducing different levels of challenge. Again, the most challenging, the better in terms of the effectiveness, provided the student can actually do the task. So this is students working at the top level of their skill, the top level of their ability, but still being successful. And if they aren't, then they get immediate corrective feedback so that next time they will be able to do it correctly. Okay, so that is to what I did with my statement, my Japanese statement, is essentially this, because there's only one real way to say this formally and politely in Japanese. So this fits into this next category. In the case of the math problems, it does not. The math problems is a higher level because you can apply that same thing, those same techniques to different problems with different variation in them and still get an effective result. So below, either just using it, applying it in a real world situation, or teaching it to somebody else. The next one is to reproduce the knowledge verbatim as a complete sentence. Tim, how do you introduce yourself to somebody in Japanese? Tim desu, dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Because I'm producing the entire thing, though verbatim, because it's verbatim, it's less effective than if variation could be introduced to it and it could still be correct, such as a math problem. But to reproduce the entire thing verbatim, or more accurately, to produce the entire thing verbatim, because I've been given no cue other than the meaning of the thing, it's the most challenging, but also the most effective. The next one is to reproduce verbatim fractions of sentences. So partial sentences. Tim, I'm going to start you. I'm going to start the introduction. Please finish it. Your name, Tim desu. And then they give me the part. Dozo yoroshiku. That's provided in the test, in the testing. And then there's a blank. Onegai shimasu. So that I have to produce half of the sentence. That is less disfluent or easier, but also as a result, less effective in terms of entrenching that learning. And this just keeps going on. Verbatim answers of multi-word gaps. So 1 or 2 words within the phrase. So, you know, a sentence with 2 words missing, but all the rest. So it's cued. And now you're more into reproduction because you've been basically fed almost the entire sentence. All you have to do is produce little tiny pieces. So you produce those pieces, the rest is reproduction because it's been provided for you. So then the next one is to reproduce verbatim words in single word gaps, which is again, truly production of that single word, but reproduction of everything else. The lowest one on this list would be reproduce verbatim answers with cues and hints to variations above. But actually the very lowest is multiple choice, right? You've actually been given all the information and all you have to do is recognize it. You don't even have to reproduce anything. You don't have to produce anything. You simply have to recognize the most correct answer. So it is the most convenient for the teacher and the training company and also the least effective for the students. So the next thing you can do, and this is sort of flips back to continue to entrench the learning over time, is wait until some forgetting has taken place. Later the same day, the next week, go through any of the ones that I've just discussed, but in particular, ideally the top one where they're producing or using the knowledge, or second, teaching it to somebody else, and then down the list as I described before. And the best way to do this is to use an SRS or spaced repetition system. I recommend Quizlet because it's the easiest, but it's basically flashcards, but you have to use them right. And I believe I've already done a video on that, but I'll probably do another one after this. But spaced repetition helps you basically stem the curve of forgetting, which is a normal part of human memory. If you don't use it, you lose it. So if you interrupt that by going through this process, you can start to encode that information more long-term into your memory. So here's really the essence of it. It's that if you understand something better, if you understand the meaning and especially the context of something, you have less need to memorize it. I often tell my students, understand, don't memorize. And it's completely true. If you understand the meaning of what you're learning, the actual memory of it becomes less relevant and easier to produce anyway. So this really comes down to deep level processing versus regurgitation, which is unfortunately what most teaching is. Now I'm going to put a link to a video here. I don't have enough time. I'm out of time. This has been Crush It Club 179, Maximize Training Effectiveness. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.